Just putting out some dioxazine violet, and I think we're good to go. Well, welcome everyone. And in this lesson, we will be painting the bluebells, and they are in fields in the springtime in the UK, and I really love them. I have never actually seen them in real life, but one day I will, I'm sure. I think there's also some bluebells in Texas or something, so maybe one day I'll get around to that. Just getting my paintbrushes here. So, as many of you know, we have got lots of birds and animals and flowers, but we don't have a lot of landscapes in the collection. So I thought this would be a good time to add some landscapes into the mix. So, and they're fun to do. So I'm gonna start off with something, when I see like a blue, mainly blue green landscape, I want to have something in the foreground that's kind of warm, and I want to bring something into the distance that will be kind of cool. And you can kind of look at that in the reference photo, although reference photos are a little tricky because they kind of flatten everything. But in the foreground, there's some little bits of red and orange. And so I want to kind of bring in a warmer color and go to a cooler color, which you see there's sort of a cool gray in the background. So we're going to just have fun with that today, playing with those different colors. So I'm going to start off with a wash, and I'm going to just mix up some different layers as I go to the back. I'm going to start off with a warm, this is just some quinacridone red, and I'm just going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue. Oh, and I should go over my colors because you may not see them all. I've got white, black, cad yellow, light orange, quinacridone red. I've got sap green, transparent brown oxide, red oxide, viridian, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and some dioxazine violet. So I could just use some dioxazine violet in the foreground, but I'm going to mix up something a little more, just a little more vibrant and a little more of a hot pink color, pinky purple. So I'm just adding a little terp to that mix, and I'm just going to get some of that really pretty mixture in the foreground. It's really going to help emphasize, you know, a coming close to you and then a moving away when we get some cooler colors. And so I'm going to get a layer of that in there. And I'm just wiping away with my Viva paper towel. These are some smoother towels that I like to paint with, and you can get them anywhere. And now I'm going to move up to a little cooler, so I think I'm going to go with a little bit of a cobalt blue, cobalt mix, and a tiny bit of that quinacridone red, and a little bit of terp. And I'm just going to add a little more quin red to that. And you can kind of bring some of that into, you know, even already I'm looking at some of the shadows, so I can put some of that into that lower level mix. And I may have to go a little darker, but let me just add a little bit more of that ultramarine blue and quinacridone red mix in there, just to darken it a little. And now I'm moving up, and it's going from sort of a more magenta to this kind of violet color. And then in comes, if you look at where the horizon line is, we can kind of raise the horizon line a little bit higher than it is, just for compositional the composition's sake. You don't want the horizon line. I'm using the square canvas. You don't want it going dead center, so I'm going to raise it up to about here. And so there's lots of nice warm colors. And that'll help when we put those cooler purpley blues down later to have some of this warmth coming through. And you can put a few hints of that up there, but I'm going to switch now to a little more cobalt in the mix. Just going to get some cobalt and kind of gray it down with a little red oxide. And I'm just going to put some of that in up here. Just trying to tone that canvas so that we have sort of that first layer that makes it more interesting later on. When I do landscape paintings, I tend to want to play with the colors a little. And as long as you get the right value, it doesn't have to be all natural colors. I like to use different colors to show the values than you see in nature, just to make it a little more exciting. At least for me, that's the way I like to do it. So now you have kind of a mix of colors. You've got this cobalt with a little red oxide up here, plus whatever was in my brush, so you'll see little hints of that pink. And then you've got this layer, we did some cobalt and quin red, and this is the more quin red with a little bit of the ultramarine blue. Okay, so now I'm going to just switch modes, and I'm going to kind of sketch out where everything's going. So I'm going to switch to my number 4 flat, and I'm going to get some, let's see, I've got out, I could use just some black, but I'm always don't want to put black on right now to darken those trees. I'll just use some, I'll use some of my ultramarine blue mix with the transparent brown oxide. And I'll just get a little bit of that going. And I'm going to first of all just kind of mark off a little bit of a horizon line here. And then we kind of know where things stop and start. And then I'm going to put in one of those trees, comes down low, about here. And just kind of rough in where these different trees are gonna go. And then we got, so there's that major one there. And then there's this nice, one over here. It's a little bit higher up, closer to the horizon, and you want to make them thinner as they go further back. And then there's another tree that's kind of a little bit further back, but I kind of, I try to pick kind of 3 major trees, and then the rest can be small and kind of, less obvious, but I kind of like to have in my composition at least 3 that you kind of see there's a connection. So, and then I'll just put in a few of these smaller ones. There's one that kind of comes back here. And then behind this one. And then there's some a lot of lighter, they look lighter brown way in the distance because they're getting the light. And then there's a few real little thin bony ones. So I'm going to put a few of those in. just to have those in the mix. And there's a whole pile of them back there, so for now I'm just gonna see what I've got here. Just kind of blend those lines a little. And okay, so that gives you sort of a framework of like where you put your, you know, your kind of compositional trees. And then there's going to be what I call kind of background trees. They're just sort of in the background, and you can add as many of those as you want. Now I kind of also like to look at the shadows I see. So when I'm looking at the reference photo, I'm gonna see different shadows, and there's all these pretty greens. I really like the combo of these purples and these lime green leaves. So I'm gonna look at where the shadows go next as part of my composition and kind of mark off where those are gonna go. So just get a little cobalt blue, some brown oxide, just something to kind of darken it a little. You could add a little bit of that quin red and cobalt to get kind of a dark purpley brown color, just to draw it in. And I see a kind of a shadow here and a pattern of shadow here. And then I see there's some shadow coming from here, kind of coming down. And then this tree also has sort of a shadow that's around it. And then now there's some nice shadows coming down from the other trees in the background, which I'll add to the sketch. So we've got just these different areas. I kind of just like to give myself an idea of where there's going to be some shadow patterns. And then I'm gonna just go and I'll get my bigger brush again, and I'm just gonna add a few of those trees marks in the background there. So I'm gonna, for those, just use, I'll use a little bit of cobalt blue and some ultramarine blue. And a little bit of that brown oxide, just to get something sort of dark. And I'll put in a few more tree shapes in the background, and I can add them, you know, using the side of, this is a number 8, so it's quite large. I can use the side of my brush, or I can, you know, kind of dab them in like this. Sometimes that gives you a little looser mark, so it doesn't look so tight, you know, like these lines going back and forth just so rigidly. So I'm gonna, and I'll put in a few branches, and you'll lose some of these lines too, so when you start adding some of the foliage to the trees, you won't have so many dark lines, but we just want to get some of those in. Add a little more brown oxide to that. And you kind of just get into the swing of it. Once you start adding some of these trees, you'll start to get into it and add some branches going here and there, just so that when you add the green on top, you've got something there to work with. You don't have to work too hard at it. And just kind of bring a few more of those lines. I really like painting this. I've painted this painting I used to sell a lot of large paintings in Canada, and this was one of my more popular paintings. Everyone loved this painting, and it just has such a magical feeling. The bluebells all over the ground is just something else with this forest around it. So I feel like that's getting better. You can see where I'm going with it. There's all these you know, lines, and it's part of the composition. So I'm going to get those in there, and then you can take your paper towel and just kind of gently loosen those ones in the distance. You can use a fan brush or just an old soft brush, but you can see now they look more integrated into the canvas, and they look more part of a background. Okay, so I feel I'm happy with that composition. One of the tricks to doing trees like this is when you're looking at the lining them up, you have, you know, different spots where you put them, and also different thicknesses. You don't want this thick tree, you know, over here, and this, you know, a thin tree. You kind of want to show that they're getting smaller as they go further away. Okay, so now for some fun stuff. We can add in some of the lighter purpley blues and some of the darker purples, some of the greens. I think I'll start off by working on the darker shadows first, adding some of that nice bluey purple. So I'm going to get some of this cobalt, and could add a little white to it to start bringing that thickness in, and add a little bit of that quinacridone red to it. If you don't have quinacridone, you can use permanent rose. It also makes the same kind of pretty purples. And just add a little more white to it to lift that up a little. And then I'm just gonna start, I'll test it out and see how it looks. Now you just sort of make marks that look like the bluebells. And I like to leave some of that purple, that magenta underpaint in there. So I'm just gonna mark off these shadows like this, just sort of dabbing that paint around. Get some more of that cobalt, maybe add a little dioxazine, and, you know, in a separate puddle do a little bit of a darker bluey purple in there. And there's some so you're just kind of building. It's like a little bit of a puzzle you're building in when you do a landscape of layers. And I'm just going to dab some more of that over there. And I'm going to go and add a little bit of that quinacridone red and a little bit of white. Make a different puddle up here. And make it a little more white to it. And you can, and when I add white to a color, it makes it cooler, and that makes it look less warm, so further away in the painting. So I'm going to add some of that in there to some of these further away darker purple shadows. And just kind of wherever there's a little bit of a shadow coming through. Doesn't need to be perfect. It's all kind of gonna work out with the kind of more of a composition choice to have these different colors and everything, and it's all gonna work out to have a nice, those nice colors and the variation. So up close, I'll go back to this puddle that doesn't have as much white and go back to adding some of those darker purples in there. So I still know where my shadows are because I've put the real dark stuff there, and then I'm just sort of building. And then I'm going to take my paper towel and just sort of just scuff those marks up a little, and it loosens it up and blends it, and it makes it look, just sort of combines it together a little more. Gives it the texture you want without having all the little, so much separation between the marks. So I just dab my paper towel, and if you wanted to, you could just use a dry brush and just sort of, you know, combine it that way too if you're not comfortable using the paper towel. So I'm starting to see a nice pattern form, lots of nice colors. So that, I really think that's, you know, kind of what you want to see at this stage. And I'm just going to keep building with the values. So I'm going to mix up some more of that lighter purpley blue. So just more white into the mix will make it a lighter shade. Kind of a lavender, it looks like a lavender color with the sunlight hitting it. And so I'm just mixing that quin red and the cobalt blue and white. And I'll add a little more of that quinacridone so it gets that nice purpley pink. And there's certain areas that you want to show so the light, you know, comes up next to that tree there, so you might make sure certain areas you want to show that light coming in and hitting that tree, and then it comes behind there. And so I'll get some real pinky dabs in there. And then just keep looking at your reference photo and just look at where where the light travels through the forest there. So I'm just kind of adding wherever there's a bit of that light. Pinky purple color, just kind of dab that in. And just get a little more of this is going to use a lot of blue in this painting, so make sure to put out enough of that cobalt blue and enough of that quinacridone red, because you sure need it. And I'm just going to get a little more of that lighter mix there. And just going to look at my reference and keep kind of making those marks. Those little, marks between the trees are the, kind of where I see some of the magic of these paintings, is the light coming through those trees. And in the shadow, I'll go a little darker with that mix. More cobalt in there, a little more quin red, just to and I haven't touched the trees yet, so I won't do any marks too close to the trees yet. That's the fun part for later. You're just sort of building the texture of all those different shades and values. So it takes a bit of time to build up to where you want to go with it, but it gives you that feeling of all the little flowers. So I'm just going to get a little more of the dark and put some of that in here where there's some real nice deep shadows in there. A little more cobalt. I always think, it's good to have variety in your color mixes. So I don't mix them all exactly the same or, have the exact same amount. When I paint these, I sort of like the variety of the pinks and blues, purples. So in here, there's going to be a nice light section that kind of comes through. So I'm going to wipe my brush off and get some more of that light lavender, pinky lavender color that I see. So kind of in this area here. And then there's sort of a light blue. Like that. Just sort of building up. We're going to add many more layers to that. And then I'm going to add some of the lighter spots up there, but they're going to be a little cooler, so more white goes into that mix. And I'm going to add some of those less detailed, so I'm not going to put in all the same spots and everything that I do. I'm just going to kind of leave some shadow coming through. You could add a little white to the pinky color and do some of that in there. Just have more of a simple mark because it's further away. And get some real light bluey pink. Put a few little dabs of that in the back there just to make it really cooler and further away. And then go and add some more of that lighter mix down here again. Gonna add a little more white to that. So you can start to see where the shadow is and how the light's coming through now that we're getting some more layers here. So we've got the shadow coming down. And we haven't added any green yet, and still have to darken the trees. And when we darken those trees, there'll be more, even more kind of a, it'll add to the value of dark and light, and it will make these bluebells pop out even more. So these ones in the shadow, I've added more blue to them now. In these, around this tree, they get really blue. They're getting more of a, you know, of a different light on them because they're in the shadow. And the ones in the sun look a little more pink. And sometimes I add a little bit of that. We can use a little bit of that dioxazine violet in the mix that really deepen these blues here that are really, really rich in the foreground here. And keep going here. Adding some more bolder blues in the shadow. Even these little trees have a nice shadow coming off of them. Just adding a little more of that bluey white to that. So now we've got some of that block in. I'm going to just add a little more of a deeper cobalt with the dioxazine in here just to get it to be really a little deeper. And in here. Okay, so you just kind of, you're looking at your reference photo, you're just sort of building, you know, the stage for all those flowers and the values and colors. And once you get that down, you can take a dry brush and just sort of, you know, blend a few of those strokes here and there so it's, you know, just a little bit more softer and less tight. Okay. And we can go in and add a little more of that cobalt and quinacridone, and you can darken some of these as they get over to this side of the drawing composition. They get a little darker. Okay, now I think if I squint down and look at my reference photo, I think I need to just get a few more dark bluey purples in there to really bring out the lighter. So I'm going to mix a real dark ultramarine with some of that quinacridone red, and I'm going to really squint down with my eyes and look where there's some real, still want it to look more blue, but so I'll add some cobalt to that. But you want to just go in now and just really kind of add back some of the dark color that you may have lost when you were putting in all those light colors. So I'm going to go back in and really make sure I've got some of these dark shadows in there, because without those dark shadows you won't be able to show the light. So we have to always make sure to remember to squint down. There's some real dark here. And we also want to, just get the right value so that those lighter purples can show off more. So I'm just adding back some of that shadow. And if I squint down, there's some real dark in here. And some of that kind of mid-tone violet color, violety, pinky color in here. Add a little white to that mix. There's some more of that light pink color coming through here. Okay, so now I think what I want to do is add some of the dark trees up front. So sometimes what I'll do is we'll just use some of this black. Sometimes I will use Payne's gray, but I'm going to just really get those in nice and dark on, especially where I see that shadow. I'm just going to add some nice dark parts to that tree. I'll leave some of the underpaint there to show the different parts and lines and shapes in the tree, but for the most part I'll just use some black on there to really darken it. And sometimes you'll notice I don't go all the way up or down. I'll just do certain parts darker than others to show there's some lighter parts to the tree. And just get that in there. And darken this one here. It's in that one got covered in flowers. And Just darken a few of these. Put a few spots of dark in there. Again, you'll notice I'm not dragging the lines all the way up and down. Put a bit of a dark shadow on this one. Like that, so. And then I'm gonna do what we did with the flowers. I'm gonna add some lighter sky in there. So I'm gonna mix up some of this white and that cobalt blue. And I'm mixing it into this puddle that had the brown oxide, and I'll just get a little bit of turp on my brush to kind of blend that in. And I see a lot of light kind of coming through in this middle area here. So put a bit of that in between the twigs and the trees. And it's kind of like creating a bit of a pattern. Put a bit of that in here. Maybe get a little more white in there. Could add a little viridian to it and some more white, and just get a bit more of the light coming through there. Just kind of popping in some of that sky there. And then add a little cobalt to that mix, and a little bit of white and the red or brown oxide, just to get that, you know, grayish color. And you could get some more of a darker, you could even add a little viridian to it. Just sort of get a little darker down as you go down. So it's now creating a little bit of a pattern. It's looking kind of interesting. You know, you can take your paper towel again and kind of soften it, or you can use a larger brush and just soften it. I just like the marks the paper towel uses, because it kind of makes twiggy looking marks across. You can see those little marks that are made look like little twigs coming from the branches. So just a few here and there. And then I'm going to now just sort of just try to get these colors to sort of pop a little more. So I'm going to add a little bit of white and some cobalt blue. Just get a little more light right up there in some of this light pinky color. Get more white into that. You want that to be sort of that horizon line is showing the light coming down. That's a lot cooler and softer in the background. Get that between those trees. And I'm looking at my reference photo and just sort of blending in some of that where I see it kind of blending into the shadow. So you're starting to, you know, get something a little more happening here. And get a little bit of that cobalt in there and get a little bit more blue, and then just on the edge of the shadow, kind of put a little bit of that more blue there. And I'm just sort of looking at my reference photo, and I'm adding those colors as I see kind of the next layer. And there's some more of that bluey color in here. And I'm a little more dabby with these because I'm giving it more of the bluebell look. And same with at the base of the tree. Now I can kind of bring some of those bluebells up onto the tree stump a little. Bring some of those little marks up here. Like that. And dab up here. And okay, now on the tree, I'll add a little bit of the blue in the shadow there. I'm gonna add a little bit of that same blue, and just using some of that mid-tone blue and purple, and put a bit of that on those two with the black to show that it's, you know, you can see it's really in the shadow there. So, and some of these too. Like that. And then I'll put just a few darks up here, but you want, for the most part, those to be more, you know, less severe. You want these ones in the front to show up the most, so. Okay. And then I think I should start adding some of those little greens. I'm just gonna make sure I use a palette knife to really mix those greens and maybe even dab some of them on. So, of course, let me see where my palette knife went. Well, I didn't seem to see one handy. Oh, there's one. Okay, so I'm gonna just mix up with a palette knife some of that lime green. So you can use a little sap and some of the cad yellow light, and you get sort of that nice green gold color. And then if you want to make a more like a real lime green, just get some of that, whoops, just add orange, no. Get a little viridian green and some of this cad yellow, and you get another real limey green color. That might be a good one for these ones in the shadow. And I see the little marks, so I'm just gonna, you know, dab some of those on. And start off with that, and I'm gonna just get a little more yellow out there, because it looks like I'll be needing a bunch more. My yellow's tube is kind of the end of its rope here. It's a little bit dried up. I don't know why. Time to get some more yellow. Okay, so if I take a little bit of that and just use a bit of this green in it, this will be sort of the real super light green that you see up in the, really catching the sunlight here. So I'm gonna just mix that up. And then I think we need something that's a little less bright. We could use some of that orangey yellow in the foreground, so some of that in the foreground would be good. And I'm just putting it on a little bit thick with my palette knife on top of this. And there's a bunch of that green coming through here, so I'm just gonna dab some of that in here, the darker mix of Viridian. The Viridian's nice because it's kind of a cool green, so it really works with this scene with the greens that I see there. But so I'm just kind of dabbing some of that in there in the shadows. And there's some bigger leaves here, which I like. And put a few of those darker marks in on the side there. Add a little bit of this now. And then I'm looking at my reference photo and just sort of starting to design where I see some of those branches that I see there. So you can use your palette knife, which would, work, take a bit of this and really just sort of add those little greens, and then here's some real bright lime green coming across. And that would work, I'm just going to switch and try my brush. So you can, I'm going to go back to this number 4 flat and just sort of dab on, see how, the difference is. It kind of, the paint's a little wet and it sort of pulls some of the color, but you get the idea. You can get a little highlighted yellow here. And get some more of that lighter green. And as I get into the center, I'll use some of these darker limier greens on these branches here. And then as I get towards the middle, maybe I'll add a little white into this pile. And the real light ones will be, again, kind of where the light is in the middle here, so we can add some of the real bright, bright yellow highlights to this middle section of the painting. And then go with a more greeny highlight on these ones off to the side. Just sort of dabbing that color in. Kind of just popping those little leaves in there. And I think while I see that there, I'm going to add a little bit more of a light to that in between the sky there where it's coming through. Needs to be a little lighter, so I'm just going to add a bit more light to that background sky color there. Just here and there, add some more light coming through. There. Okay. And while I see it, I'm going to add a little bit more of that bright purple. There. And then there's some real pretty bright leaves here, right in the, you know, kind of draws you in the front here if you put some of those larger leaves right there. And I'll put some more. There's a nice branch coming through here. And I'm just making really abstract-y marks to show that branch there. Making leafy shapes, you know, just real loose. And some of these kind of come across here. And then over here, these ones get a lot smaller. The ones up front, you could use a brush, and almost the ones further away, you know, might be better just to dab some of these with a palette knife because they're very small and kind of more like little dots of color. And I get some white and make a few real bright yellow, limey yellow highlights there. And a few little flicks of that light green in here. And then I might get my palette knife. Oh, make sure your palette knife is clean. And I'll add a little more, some of those lighter pinks in my foreground, those lighter purpley pink flowers. I'll add some of the details with my palette knife there just to get a little bit, you know, thicker paint, and so they really show up some of those little highlights there. Like that. And then I'll do the same and get some more of that bluey color and just get a few of those lighter kind of purpley bluey marks in here. And then just because we have so many, we have the green and the purple, I sometimes will throw a couple little dabs of orange, maybe a little bit of brown oxide and orange. I'm going to just put a few little notes in there of, kind of a rusty orange color, just to really, complement some of the greens and purples. And I'm just gonna add a few real sparkly yellows in there. And then just get a little bit more of that purpley color, and make sure you get some more of the light coming through there. So you just kind of work your way through it, layer by layer like this. And, you can add more detail or less detail than I did, but I kind of like the way this turned out. I like all the colors and the feeling it has, and I really enjoy looking at these pictures of the bluebells. So I hope you like this lesson, and I'll look forward to seeing your paintings on the Bold Strokes page, or you can send it to me through an email and show me what you got. But yeah, I really hope you enjoy this landscape, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.